This is Cold Star, Tales from the Spine, where the Milky Way meets Andromeda. One voice. One running pair of boots. Try to keep your coffee safe. My name is Ned Valen. There are two kinds of trouble in the spine, the kind that finds you because you're unlucky, and the kind you find because you insist on pointing at the crooked ledger and saying, politely, that's wrong. I have never been accused of tact. Once, pointing at a senior official's cozy side contracts with Prometheus felt responsible. The result was a column of paperwork stamped, confidential, that went public the wrong way, and suddenly I was the guy the government hoped you'd forget. So began the great not-so-graceful retreat. Think less cinematic escape and more, someone spilled an entire crate of bureaucracy on a crowded market, and then we had to run. It started at New Singapore Waypoint, where a mid-level audits officer, one of those people who believe forms are an emotional experience, decided to reward my curiosity with an arrest warrant and a badge that looked like a melted coin. The official in question, Director Calidus, ran his hands as though he knew exactly how to make trouble look tidy. He also had a face perfectly tuned to press releases. I was not apprehended because the universe enjoys irony, I was apprehended because a minor clerk tried to do his job during the busiest hour of lunch. I had been in the platform market giving a speech that would now, in retrospect, have been better kept as an internal memo. I had said, casually, that Prometheus's research grants sometimes ended up on yachts with their logo. The phrase, public goods, slipped into the conversation, and a drone with a microphone thought it had arrived at the evening's entertainment. A video went viral in exactly 7 minutes. My name got awkwardly attached. There are worse viral moments to have. Cat videos are bad, but at least cats are cute. I had exposed a corruption thread that braided several officials with resource contracts. Prometheus did not find it elegant. Calidus did not like embarrassment. The Corpi announced they would like to have a word. Running from government men is not glamorous. It is, however, an excellent opportunity to test the limits of improvisation, and to meet some people you didn't know would be useful. First, Mika decided that disguises were a necessary morale booster. She produced a hat that looked like it had been knitted by a drunk artisan and painted 3 stripes across my face with engine grease. She pronounced me marginally less memorable. I wore it for morale. It worked exactly like a hat usually works in a fugitive scenario, not at all, but you feel resourceful. Tor did what Tor does. He scanned the ledger of debts and favors like a man taking inventory. He made calls. He called people who owed him favors and people who owed those people favors. The chain was Byzantine and smelled faintly of regret. In the end he introduced us to an old friend named Julia at New Lisbon, who ran an antique shipping registry that doubled as a very honest bar. "We'll declare you an exhibit," she said. "We'll call you the artifact of bad timing." She meant it as a joke and a plan. Enric got nervous and offered to bribe the deputy for life. He was politely told that bribery required more finesse than cash and that we were on a list. He then spent the rest of the run producing increasingly elaborate fake personas for us to adopt: retired spice librarian, itinerant furniture appraiser, and intergalactic pigeon farmer. The pigeon farmer idea was the least plausible and yet the one Enric argued for with the most passion. The first step, vanish from the official feeds. That meant fingerprints in unhelpful places, a false maintenance call that would keep the Corpi occupied, and a night train through an industrial yard where the railcars smelled like rumors. Mika and I rode while Tor and Enric made the introductions. I clutched my flask and practiced my "I'm just a retired librarian" posture. It was awkward and effective in direct proportion. A chase began like an argument, gradual, then louder. Director Calidus sent a polite emissary, 2 men in grey coats who believed sternness was a breathable badge. They found the harrow and, mild confusion, discovered we'd left a fake ledger full of recipes for nutrient stew in our pile of manifest decoys. The emissaries spent 2 hours politely debating stew cooking procedures. That gave us a window. We ducked through New Venice Yard where hulks of ships crouched like sleeping beasts. Here the Argus looked small and promising. We had a plan, and the plan was, make a noise worse than the noise they were looking for. We arrange a public spectacle, nothing says, not the person you seek, like a very loud and very embarrassing community theater. Mika rigged 4 defunct welding torches to star into a chorus of sparks, and Rick rented a chorus of sailors who could sing terribly on cue. Tor arranged for 2 legal protesters with suspiciously awful signs to divert attention with righteous indignation. The plan hinged on a single truth: bureaucracy hates looking foolish more than it hates being questioned. So we staged a ludicrous street play in the market square called The Joys of Tax Forms. A man in a paper hat recited line after line of tax code as if it were Shakespeare. The auditors came to see if we were genuine fools and were promptly mobbed by civilians who preferred mockery to arrests. While everyone watched a man cry over a ledger, we slipped a small crate labeled "Broken Bureaucratic Heart" into a maintenance pass and rode a service elevator down to the freight stacks. Everything went decently until the Ketheri got involved. Valish, remember him, had a less than legal habit of ferrying people across back routes when asked politely with good credit or polite conversation. He'd been owed a favor. He arrived with a small skiff that hummed like a pleased insect and announced that he'd be taking a passenger, Ned Valen. He hopped aboard, and in 3 silent beats we were cutting a path between ship hulks. Now, there is a certain absurdity to hitching a ride while your name is trending for exposing corruption. The skiff had curtains that looked like someone had tried to upholster a cloud. I sat and tried to look calm while the outside world managed not to be calm at all. For reasons I do not fully understand, Valish decided to hum a little. Ketheri humming is like a musical shrug, it is comforting and unsettling in equal parts. Halfway through our exit, a Corpi drone, one of those administrative automatons dressed in gray, decided that the skiff looked suspicious and triggered an approach. The skiff's engine hiccuped, Valish made a noise that translated roughly to "Oh, spice," and Mika, in an act of brave absurdity, tossed a bag of grease at the drone. The grease was intended to gum up a hinge. What it actually did was coat the drone's identification plates with a film of black oil and render its facial recognition cache into chaos. The drone mistook the reflection for a philosophical crisis and spent 7 minutes pondering its identity while chirping polite existential questions. It was genuinely moved by its own confusion. This afforded us another window. We slipped to New Lisbon, where Julia had slid our names into a ledger labeled "Exhibits of Local Color." She handed us disguised papers and a small, ridiculous uniform for me, the hat returned, a badge that said "Artifact Handler," and a printed permit that claimed we were responsible for maintaining an ancient statue of a forgotten saint. The permit was stamped by a county office that either loved bureaucratic humor or had fallen asleep on the job. For once, the universe's indifference worked for us. But our respite was not permanent. Director Calidus took personally to humiliation and escalated from emissaries to a minor fleet of official boats that smelled like lemon and enforcement. He sent a public notice that hinted the "artifact handler" was a smuggler and attached a picture that resembled me in the hat, because of course it did. The harried citizens of New Lisbon, who enjoyed a spectacle and who also enjoyed their own privacy, decided they didn't like the Corpi policing their business. A small uprising of civic annoyance ensued, mostly consisting of people shouting poetic insults at drones and throwing stale pastries that had been rejected by the market bakery. It was surprisingly effective. The chase across the spine in that month resembled a bad touring production. We performed in New Venice, slept in New Reykjavik, learned that no one checks a person who looks like a retired furniture appraiser. We made mistakes. Tor accidentally recruited a courier gang who insisted on formal introductions and solemn toasts, which involved a lot of ceremonial drinking that left Tor with a headache and more favors than he deserved. Enric adopted a parrot that mimicked Director Calidus and caused a minor paperwork riot when it squawked, "Audit," in the middle of an open market. But the funniest and most human moment arrived when we finally had to meet Calidus face to face. He arranged a hearing on neutral ground, Helio Station, where the lights are honest and the chairs are too stiff. We were to attend under a summons. I considered running. Mika considered hiding. Tor considered pleading. Enric considered bribing the station's potted plant, which he seemed to think had authority. We did attend because pride and curiosity are combustible. Also, I was tired of being dramatically misinterpreted on trending feeds. In the hearing, Calidus sat behind a desk that had a plaque, "For the people." He read out a list of accusations that were impressively dull and remarkably long. The room smelled of official coffee and a little bit of melted plastic. At the front of the gallery sat a small Kethri delegation and a Sarnik dock crew who had owed us favors. They did not come for violence, they came for an interesting voice to mock if things went poorly. When my turn came, I spoke plainly and too honestly, which is exactly the style that makes certain officials uncomfortable. I could have presented evidence in measured clauses. I could have filed items in triplicate. Instead, I told a story, about small people who lost their harvests to contracts dressed as research grants, about the way Prometheus winners sometimes left communities worse off. I used names. I used receipts. I used a line in the transcript where I read an email from a Prometheus liaison that described a donation as a strategic investment. It was the theater of honesty. Calidus sputtered. The legal committee blinked. Prometheus's legal rep smiled in that particular way measured to be photographed with. And then an unexpected thing happened, the Kethri delegation stood and hummed in unison, an ancient form of choir that, in their culture, indicates deep approval. The Sarnik front row muttered in guttural agreement. 2 human members on the committee, one from New Lisbon and one from New Valparaiso, cleared their throats and asked simple, disarming questions that exposed holes in Calidus's narrative. What started as an attempt to humiliate me turned into a messy public accounting. Calidus found himself on the defensive. The Corpi realized their tidy badge had been shoved into the messy gears of public opinion. A hearing that was meant to be a show trial became an uncomfortable town meeting. Calidus gave a speech about protocol and decorum and the rule of law that was thin with sincerity. He did not resign on the spot, but the photographic record of his forehead sweating did wonders for certain paper trail pursuits. We did not get a clean victory. Nobody stages a perfect clearing in our part of space. But the hearing produced 2 important results. Calidus's office was put under review, and Prometheus's ostentatious donation to one small village was registered as questionable spending. More importantly, the story made it harder for bureaucrats to hide behind their own polished press releases. It made people remember that names and receipts mattered. And because none of life is purely noble, there was also a comedic moment when Enric's parrot, who had been smuggled in under a gifted blanket, squawked, "Audit," at the precise moment Calidus attempted a dramatic pause. The room laughed, which was lethal to a tightly staged humiliation. Laughter is a public metal detector for bullshit. In the aftermath, we did what fugitives do when the dust settles, we drank. We drank with Kethri colors and Sarnik sea smoke, with human spirits and a ridiculous fermented pastry wine Julia insisted we try. The mood was warm and ridiculous. Tor promised to never again recruit a courier gang without a vetting ritual. Mika promised to calibrate jump vectors less with intuition and more with schematics. Enric apologized to a potted plant he tried to bribe. I promised to keep the flask where it belonged, inside a locker, behind a promise, and occasionally in my hand when a night required courage. So yes, I ran from the government for exposing corruption. I also made a spectacle that annoyed a director, made friends who hummed when you told the truth, and collected favors that bite time in the spine. It was messy. It was funny. It cost us herbs, because Julia's pastry wine required rare spice, and it bought us noise, an important commodity if you're trying to keep a ship flying while powerful people tidy their desks. If you ask whether I'd do it again, I'd say, with better disguises and fewer parrot incidents, yes. The spine tolerates bluntness when it comes wrapped in humor and a chorus of unlikely allies. And when the ledger times come due, you want a crew who will argue over the bill and then show up with duct tape and laughter. End.